Okay, so this is not the video that I was planning on releasing this week. I had a video called Why the Ten Commandments Are a Bit Shit. Okay, which is about 3/4 of the way through editing, and I've suspended that. That will be released next week, all being well in the world. This week I wanted to embellish on last week's video, which I was a little bit disappointed. The people that watched it really seemed to enjoy it, get something out of it. I enjoyed putting it together. There's a lot of ideas that I'd thought about for a fair while that I could put into that video, and a few that I'd had very recently in the last couple of weeks making the video that sort of came to mind. So that was a positive experience for me. And I got a couple of really good video responses from Got That Funk Paul and from Glenn Watson. I'll mention a little bit to do with their videos towards the end of this video. I'll also link them in the groinal bar, because Glenn Watson, he went mainly on the alien side and Got That Funk on the AI side, because last week's video, that's what it was about. Aliens, do they pose a threat to us? Does artificial intelligence, general artificial intelligence, does that pose a threat to us? That was the two main themes of the video. And it just so happens that a day after I released that on Channel 4 in the UK, a series started called Humans, based on a Swedish program called Real Humans. Apparently it's the same plot, the same thing, kind of remake. And it's about androids and people having personal androids. Now, maybe it's just a fucking coincidence that that came out a day after my video. Or maybe that's just Channel 4 just trying to ride on the crest of a wave of my 1,000 views there. I don't know. I'll leave you to decide on that one. Now, but what I wanted to do is I wanted to discuss the program. Now, if you've got access and you can watch that program, I don't know what the situation is with regarding watching Channel 4 programs abroad. If you have access to them, I recommend it. It was really, really good. But there were some issues with it, or some things that cropped up as a result of it that I found really, really interesting. So I wanted to go through them. So what I will do first, you don't have to watch the program before you watch this video, is just to set the scene. So it was kind of set in a kind of parallel now. It wasn't set in the future, it's kind of parallel now, with the world pretty much as we know it, except for some reason the technology that would lie behind artificial intelligence, and seemingly the ability to synthesize what looks like realistic skin on these androids or synths or whatever you want to call them, is far advanced from what we have. And these things are being used generally within the population to more and more, it would seem in the program, to complete jobs, okay, to be able to carry out less and less mundane tasks seemingly as time goes on. And what it centers around several people, but the main one is this family with a father who seems to be at home all the time. I think he maybe has a job, but he's the main sort of doing most of the parenting, with a couple of older children. And then the mother, she's got a more high-powered job. It looks like a legal job, and she's working away for some of the time. He wants some help around the house, so he gets one of these androids to help him with his task. There are some other characters that are important. One of them is this older guy. He needs some medical care. We would need home help, right? And the home help is being provided by the NHS by using these androids. So that's the kind of thing. There are other themes within it. Obviously, some of them have developed a greater level of intelligence, self-awareness. Some of them are self-aware and care about their own mortality, I suppose you would say, because they've been boosted, and we don't know how that's come about as of yet in the program just after the first episode, but that kind of sets the scene. So these were some of the things that set me thinking with it. The first was that the father, he goes to pick this up. He's decided, obviously his wife's not too keen, but he goes to pick up one of these androids. And judging by the kind of conversation that takes place, one of these androids costs about as much, perhaps, as a family car, I would say. That's kind of, I think, what you're talking about in the scope of an expense there. That's the kind of thing you're talking about. Nobody would buy a car without having a look at the fucking thing first. You'd want to see the car that you're getting, the model you're getting, the colour you're getting. And yet when he goes to pick this fucking thing up, it's like, right, I want one, and it comes out in this bag. Right, and then they unzip the bag, and this is the one that he's having. Now, given that all these androids don't look the same, they're all humanoid, and the one he gets, they call Anita, and I'll show you a picture of her. She's fucking gorgeous, right? So all the male ones are gorgeous, all the female ones are gorgeous. I think you'd want to know what it looked like before you'd handed your money over. You'd want to be able to go in and say, yeah, that's the one that I want. Because they all look different, and they're all gorgeous, but they all look different. And say, yeah, that's the one that I fancy. So I found that a little bit unconvincing. And that goes into the whole sex thing, doesn't it? There was one slight reference to the sex thing with it, with regard, he had this kind of thing, this little card, which he kind of just slipped into his pocket later on when his wife was home, that it said 18 plus options, right? So obviously you can get sort of sexual attachments to this thing, but not sort of, it was really, really downplayed, which I found really, really unconvincing. It reminded me of Star Trek with our holodeck. And the thing with a holodeck in Star Trek is they always use it for real kind of bullshit. It's always like some Bronte-esque period drama or some kind of other kind of bullshit. It's never for the kind of thing you actually use it for, which would be fucking gangbangs and orgies and just sex. And that was one of the things that Red Dwarf always did really, really well. Red Dwarf had a virtual reality thing, right? And Dave Lister just uses it for shagging. In fact, Crichton the Robot complains that he's wearing out the fucking groinal attachment for the VR suit, and he has to keep mending it, right? That is the reality of the thing. Whenever any technology comes in, how can you use it for shagging, right? And although these androids, they're a bit stiff and they're not quite human, it's better than a vibrator or a fleshlight. I better show you a picture of a fleshlight in here, which is like a kind of torch thing, but you stick your knob in the end, right? It's a lot closer to a human than that. And after all, right, it's at your beck and call. This Anita, right, she's going to do whatever the fuck you want. I mean, imagine my old friend, Rev Badger-Buggerer, and how he would get on with this.
Hello, Reverend. Is there anything I can do for you?
There you are, Anita. Yes, just the person. I've been going through these church documents and I'm absolutely parched. Could you get me a lovely cup of tea, please?
Here you are, Reverend.
Thank you so much, Anita. That's just the ticket. Thank you. Marvellous.
Anything else I can do for you, Reverend?
Anything else you can do for me? Well, actually, yes, there is, you sexy little minx. How about you take all of your clothes off, bend over this table, and I'm going to fuck you up the arse?
Oh, certainly, sir. Your wish is my command.
Marvellous.
Of course, that is the fantasy, and this is the reality.
Is there anything else I can do for you, Reverend?
Anything else you can do for me? Well, actually, yes, there is, you sexy little minx. How about you take all of your clothes off, bend over this table, and I'm going to fuck you up the arse?
I'm sorry, Reverend. A functioning anus is an optional upgrade of which I'm not equipped.
What? Dawkins.
Serves him right, the cheap bastard.
So I found that really sanitised, to be fair, because the sexual aspect is just a part of life. I'm damn sure if these kind of things existed and my wife agreed for us to have one, she'd make sure she'd be there with me and she'd say, can we have a really fucking ugly one, please? That's all that I know with regard to that. But there were a couple of other points that this programme brought up that I thought, but perhaps with a bit more thoughtful points. The first was that there was this guy in it who had it as the home help from the NHS, you know. And then this NHS woman turns up and she says, oh yes, we need to assess your robot to check it's working properly. I've brought this new one with me that can conduct all these tests. It can she can monitor this very matron-like looking robot. And she can measure your blood pressure just by, just sort of touching you on the neck and all this kind of high-tech stuff. And clearly he had bonded with his old robot, so much so, his old android, so much so that he'd send his android off because, as becomes clear as the episode goes on, this android is misfiring. It's bleeding blue blood out its nose and it starts doing things wrong and it actually ends up hitting somebody in a supermarket later on in the episode. It's going wrong, but he has made an attachment with it, right? And I found this all really unconvincing. Not that he'd made an attachment, of course people would, but that, it's this classic thing, isn't it, with series and with films, is that anything big corporation is perceived as being, having no sense of empathy as to what the human condition is about, and it's largely bullshit. It just doesn't work like that. The NHS knows, as we all know, for example, that old people benefit from having cats and dogs, right? And although they don't provide cats and dogs in that respect, nobody would ever say to an old person whose dog had a bit of a wounded leg, well, I think your dog's probably only got a couple of years left. What we'll do is we'll kill that dog now and we'll give you a new dog, because we understand how people bond with their animals. They have an emotional attachment, and how that's really important to old people. And so the idea that they would go into this old guy who was clearly bonded emotionally with his android and just say, yeah, he's going to have to be taken away and decommissioned and you'll have this shiny new one, as if there's just no comprehension of that side of humanity and the way that we attach to things that aren't humans. I just found it just doesn't reflect reality for a start, and it's just a kind of, it's a real trope, isn't it? It's fucking trope is what it is. It's a trope that's used all too often, I think, in films and in TV series and all that kind of stuff. But the one that really jumped out as me as the most interesting thing as I was watching this, and it kind of brought me back to the Industrial Revolution, right, and this idea of machines taking over our jobs, and what is there going to be left for us to do, and that was a real worry, wasn't it, during the Industrial Revolution? But it wasn't really based on anything, because there's still lots and lots and lots of things that human beings can do that machines can't do. But here you are looking at a situation now where, as I'm watching the programme, I'm thinking, actually, what is left? What is there that human beings couldn't do? Or at least as far as this programme went, it was just one generation away from these machines being able to do everything that we could do and do everything better. And so how does it work? How does the economy function? How do people's lives function? What is there left for people to do? The daughter in the family, this is the daughter of the guy who goes out to buy one because his wife's away a lot and he needs some help around the house. At one point, the mother's come home and the mother and the father are talking to her about her exam results, and that they're going down, right? Her grades, her predicted grades are going down. And she says, what's the point? What's the point me getting good grades? What's the point me doing all this work when these synths can just do it so much better than I can? Whatever grade I can get, they can do these things so much better than I can. And that really hit home to me when I saw that. It really got me thinking, so much so I was thinking more about the issues than I was watching the programme. Where does this lead? If we actually got our society into that position where we can create these kind of humanoids that do everything better than we can do, then how does it work? The people that are rich enough to have these humanoids working in their factories and doing all the jobs, well, that's kind of looks like it's okay for them. But what is there for the rest of us to do? There's no way for us to earn money. But if there's no way for us to earn money, there's no way for us to buy the goods and services of the rich people that can afford to have all the humanoids beavering away in their factories. And so they don't have the money to repair the robots that are beavering away in the factories, nor the ability to make any more money and to keep themselves going. So it seems as if the whole economy kind of grinds to a halt there. Nobody has the ability to buy anything, and there's nothing for anybody to do anymore to generate that money to be able to stimulate the economy by buying things. It also seems to grind to a fucking halt. So really interested to know if anybody sees what the way round that would be. If that is an inevitability of our future, that we might be able to have things like this and to be made at a cost that would allow companies to implement them to do the kind of tasks that we all do on a day-to-day basis. So that was it really with regard to that. I wanted to talk about the two videos, the video that Got That Funk made and the video that Glenn Watson made. Now, I'll talk about the Got That Funk one first, because he talked about AI and he made something which is, I suppose it's not a major revelatory point, but it was something that I didn't mention in my video, which was this idea of things like fear and pain. And I talked about things like survival and reproduction, and whether perhaps they are artifacts of our evolutionary past, I should say, and that if you created an artificial intelligence without that evolutionary process to get there, that perhaps they wouldn't have those desires and those drives. One thing I will say on the survival thing, which I got into a couple of discussions in comments, people said to me, they fired back at me with the survival thing about the evolutionary advantage of that. I mentioned that in the video. Of course there's an evolutionary advantage to that, but I share the same innate component as my pet cat, as your pet dog, as somebody else's pet fucking hamster. We all have that innate desire to stay alive, and that appears to be sufficient for 99.999999% of life on Earth. Right, so this other thing that we have as human beings, which is this ability to introspect upon ourselves and to think, you know, wow, I'm conscious, I'm self-conscious, I am alive, and to consider our own death, our own demise, to consider the fact that we may not exist anymore. That is a level that lies over and above the drive and the desire that has been sufficient for all these other animals. So what I'm saying is that perhaps there isn't an evolutionary necessity to have that desire to survive. The innate bit, perhaps that's an evolutionary thing. Well, of course that's an evolutionary thing. But the actual conscious introspection, the ability to look at ourselves and to imagine our own non-existence, that seems to be superfluous. So it could be that that is something that would emerge without the evolutionary process. That's what I said. That's what I was referring to when I made my video, just to clarify that. But Paul talked about fear. And he talked about pain and said, look, these are surely things that would arise as a result of evolutionary processes. And unless you manage to replicate them, surely that creates a potential danger. And I'm sure we can see how it does, because without the fear of pain or the fear of anything, of non-existence or whatever, that's a big motivator in limiting our behaviours, isn't it? It's a big avoidance. We don't want to be in pain. We don't want our lives to terminate. We don't want to put ourselves in jeopardy. And because we can experience those things ourselves, we can empathise with the experience that others have with regard to pain, that others may have with regard to fearing their non-existence. So if the artificial intelligence we created, the general artificial intelligence with similar levels, cognitive and conscious levels to ourselves, didn't possess those things, then perhaps that would allow them, that would let them off the leash in a way that we're not let off the leash. And I thought that was a really interesting point that Paul made. Last but not least, I want to talk about the point that Glenn mentioned in his, which was to do, he talked for quite a period in his about radio waves, about electromagnetic radiation and the ability to detect them, for other civilizations to detect ours, for us to detect theirs. And he said that maybe other civilizations themselves wouldn't be able to detect electromagnetic radiation, such that they maybe wouldn't use it as a method of communication. Which I think, if I understood his argument right there, I personally find that a little bit tough to get my head around, because it's such a useful thing to be able to detect that. It seems almost inconceivable that you wouldn't be able to detect that. After all, you know, we can detect various different parts of the spectrum in various different ways. So it seems almost, you know, so they have evolved as different processes there. So we've evolved it several times. So it seems almost inconceivable that it wouldn't arise. But I wanted to we talked in my first video about Paul Davis's book, The Eerie Silence, and one of the things that he mentioned in there, which is a really, really interesting point, is that as we got to the age where we started sending out broadcast signals, radio signals, TV signals, we kind of assumed that was the future and that's the way things are, and so that any technology that was more advanced than us would be doing the same thing. They would be sending out all these signals, and those are signals that we are able to detect, and that's what we've tried to do, haven't we? We've tried to detect signals in electromagnetic radiation hitting the Earth, right, to see if we can get a pattern, to see if we can detect some aliens somewhere along the lines, right, some alien life. But what Paul Davis says, if you think what's happening, we assumed that would stretch on. Once we developed that technology, we would keep broadcasting. But already not many decades have gone by, and already we are switching away from broadcasting. And it may not be many decades that the Earth will once again fall radio silent, right? Because we're moving away from that as a method of transmitting signals. So this kind of it's a very wasteful way of doing it. I want to transmit a TV signal, so I have a large mast and just fucking blast it out in all directions. You pick up a fragment of that signal and then amplify that fragment of the signal. It's not really a very clever way of doing it, really, is it, when you think about it? And we're already using much better ways of communicating now. bouncing the signal straight off a satellite, or what we do is we use fiber optic technology, etc. And so we never actually end up broadcasting it. Sure, the broadcast towers are still functioning now, and I can still watch my television via that way, or listen to my radio that way, but for how much longer are we going to carry on doing that? It might only be a few decades, so you might only be talking 100 years, 200 years, that we would expect any other civilization and any other species more advanced than ourselves to go through that electromagnetic broadcasting stage. And so unless we caught them, unless we just happened to be within that small window, we'd go from a period where we couldn't detect them because they weren't advanced enough to a period where we won't detect them just 200 years later because they're more advanced and they don't need to use that technology anymore. So that's just one more thing to think about. Been a little bit of a mishmash of different things this video. I hope you allow me that. Something a little bit more structured next week, but I hope this has given you a little bit more food for thought, especially if you enjoyed last week's video. If you didn't watch it, it was a good video. It's quite a lot of stuff involved in that video, a little bit more structured than this one. Quite an interesting video. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this one. Thank you for watching, and bye for now.